Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. So, where is it? So, to start with, this is just a curve of human energy use, supply and use, going back to 1850, and it's for the last 50 years or so it's been going up by 2.4% per year, and the century before that was only going up at about roughly 1% per year. A few ups and downs in between individual years, and before that at a much lower rate. But since year dot, our energy supply has been going up, and we've been using that energy to do all kinds of stuff and to influence our planet, the place that we live on. And for a long, long time that didn't really matter much, because the planet was a big, robust place compared to everything that humans could do to influence it. But the planet hasn't been getting any more robust, and we've been getting more and more powerful, not just because we've got this energy supply that we use to influence the planet by kind of a mixture of accident and design, but also but we've been getting more efficient with that energy, so we can do more with a given amount of energy all the time. And we've been getting more inventive. We've invented things like bombs and chemicals and plastics and all kinds of different stuff. So our power over this planet has been going up and up and up. And we used to be just a small species running around on a big planet. So this is the sort of simple way of explaining what's happened to us, is that it used to be like this: big planet, few little people running around on it, but the planet was basically big and robust. And now the balance has tipped, and quite suddenly and really recently it's like that. And it's a fragile planet, and we'll smash it up if we're not really careful with it. 100 years ago we couldn't smash it up even if we tried. And we did try quite hard. 50 years ago, we worked out we could smash it up, but if we really did some stupid things like have a nuclear war. Now, we'll smash it up unless we try pretty hard not to. And our energy supply, if it keeps going up, we're going to get more and more powerful. We're going to have to be even more careful year by year not to smash the place up. So that takes us into this thing called the Anthropocene. Just this era in which it's humans that are affecting the planet. And we're not used to that. And it's a totally different context for humans to operate in. So all the economics, the way we've run society, the way we've thought about everything, that was all developed in this era. And now that we're in this situation, we have to ask ourselves very carefully how much of anything about how we do life is still fit for purpose. And the stuff that's not fit for purpose, we've got to find a way of re-engineering it and reworking it really, really quickly. So that's what this book's about. So we've got this opportunity with all this technology. We've got an opportunity to live better than ever, arguably, but if we don't blunder into living worse or not at all. So here's the book. There it is. And the reason I've put it up like this is a draft version with the bits in yellow that weren't finished yet. So there it is. And it's full of kind of graphs and maths and stats and analysis and stuff. I hope some of the stats and analysis are kind of so make your eyes pop out on stalks. The thought of how do we live like this, and how come we're not living so much better than this, given how we could be living, and also how much trouble we're going to be in if we don't change our ways. But the other reason I've put it up in all like that is that ideally you wouldn't read it as a book page by page. Ideally you'd kind of just stare at the whole thing until you'd just absorb the whole lot. Because it's not really a linear story. We're in a situation now where the challenges we face are global, and they're all joined up, and it's a very multidisciplinary thing. So it's no good looking at climate change on its own, or plastics on their own, or feeding the world on their own. All these things are completely interconnected, and it's no good looking at just the science, or just the science and technology, or even just the science, the technology, the politics and the economics. It's actually, everything is so inescapably joined up now that we have to look at the whole thing in one go. And you could say, well, that's too complicated, but like it or not, it's better to have some kind of view of the whole picture from every angle than to have a really detailed view of just from specialist angles. So that's why. So this book is my attempt at the big picture of absolutely everything, because I think that's what we need to do now. We need to hold the whole picture in our heads if we're going to be sensible about what we do about it. So just some pictures about some of the stuff that's going on. So there's some insects. So we've got a biodiversity challenge, and plants as well. And all these species. One of these species is that one over there that we're getting more of every year. And beautiful world, but that beach full of plastic that we're hearing a lot about. And all those people up in the corner there have got to eat, so there's some lovely food. So that's vegetarian food. And all these people have got to live somewhere. Maybe they live in places like that, or maybe they live in places like that. I hope you can see those pictures a bit small, but there's questions about how we live and the huge inequality between those two situations. Is that going to be okay, or do we need to sort that out if we're going to be able to get on top of things like climate change and so on? And then these are just pictures of various ways in which we do our meat and dairy, so some of our food. And there's a picture of some antibiotics, because 2/3 of our antibiotics are currently, the world's antibiotics are currently fed to farm animals. And there's another kind of, hi Chris, another kind of issue we've got to deal with, and then of course there's where our energy comes from, some fossil fuel and some solar panels and a few wind turbines, and there's some consequences of climate change. So I'm just trying to give you some sort of snapshot of, there's a lot of things going on at once that we need to think about all together. So quick, just before we go any further, I just want to head off this question, well, is there really no planet B? Because I think this idea that there might be a planet B is actually in danger of getting some serious traction. So Elon Musk has been talking about it. Okay, he talks about a lot of things, but even Stephen Hawking, before he died, talked about, well, we have to be very careful for the next 100 years because we're not leaving the planet for the next 100 years. So I'll just have a look at the feasibility with which we might leave this planet to see if this one planet living thing is temporary or not. So the nearest planet that could be any good to live on, I'm not going to count Mars because that'd be desperate. It's about 4 light years away, so it's kind of local. So if you're prepared to put up with a long journey, then if you're prepared to put up with 40 years, then you could get there in. You'd only have to travel at 1/10 of the speed of light. And there must be some physicists in the room. If you calculate the kinetic energy of a person, no spaceship, no nothing, just a person traveling through space at 1/10 of the speed of light, then you've got that the kinetic energy of that person is about the same as about 500,000 people use in a year. But you've got some other considerations, like it'd be a good idea to have a spaceship. This 500,000 people is just a person flying through space in their underpants. The rockets are probably going to lose. There's probably some inefficiency in the energy conversion to that kinetic energy. It's probably enormous, whatever you do about it. You might want some equipment on board if you're going to be if you're going to for your 40 years, and it might be a good idea to have something to help you slow down at the other end, so you don't crash into your new home at 30,000 kilometers a second. So for all those, when you start sort of looking at how much energy it might take to get a spaceship with just a reasonable handful of people on it off to that other planet, it's something like a reasonably big handful of people. You might would be the whole of the world's human energy supply at the moment for a year. So it isn't going to be happening. So very unlikely that any one of us is going to have any great grandchildren going off to another planet. So there is no planet B. And Star Trek is fiction, but I think we've all been brought up on all kinds of science fiction of interplanetary travel, and I think the idea does sow a seed in our heads, but it isn't going to be happening, at least not soon. Not within the next few generations. So okay, just to go through some of the stuff that's in the book, just to give you a tour of what's in it. So there's all the sort of physical, obvious challenges we've got. We need to look at our energy supply. There's climate change, strongly related to that. We need to feed everybody. We've got the questions about population. Is that the whole problem, or is it a part of the problem, or what? There's other pollutants as well. There's ocean acidification. There's people asking questions about artificial intelligence. We've got an antibiotics crisis threatening. You don't have to think long about a world without antibiotics to get a bit of a scary picture. We've got to sort out our transport in all of this, plastics, of course, and last but absolutely not least, our biodiversity. So those are, it's not necessarily a complete list, but we do need to manage all those things at the same time. Those are the kind of physical things we need to deal with. And the good news is, and I'll talk through some of the bits of this, and the first sort of maybe half the book is mainly dedicated to going through, well, what are the technical solutions to all this, and can we do it? And it turns out, the good news is, it turns out, and I'll talk through some of this in a minute, it turns out all the technological solutions that we need to sort all that stuff are kind of there or thereabouts, actually. Or we can be reasonably confident if we put our mind to it, we'd get there. So the question is, what would it take for humans to be sorting out these technically solvable problems that we've got? So that takes us into a whole load of other stuff. So which way should I take? So truth and trust, I mean, there's more complexity than we've ever had before to deal with. So our view of the truth, whatever that might be, needs to be clearer than we've ever had it. And yet things have been happening that suggest that actually it's been going the opposite way in some respects of late. So we need to really sharpen up our capacity to insist on truth, work out whether we're getting a good view of the truth, work out whether the information source that we're trusting is worthy of that trust. And we need to get better in insisting on it, and we need to make sure that media and politicians and so on that aren't up to the standard, the higher standard that we now need to set, somehow find themselves sidelined. Questions about inequality. So is inequality just something that we've always put up with, a whole lot of inequality, and that's fine, that's just the way the world is, and it's not very nice, but we can't really be bothered to sort it out? Or does inequality turn out to be something that actually, when you really look at what it would take to deal with climate change, for example, it becomes impossible to sort it out because it requires a level of global agreement that's actually not possible to have if you haven't increased the sense of kind of fairness to allow you to have that negotiation. So I think it does. We'll talk about more about that in a minute. And aligned with that, economics. So there's I'm not an economist, but there are some things about economics that it's very clear aren't fit for the Anthropocene at the moment. And then there's stuff about business and stuff about a little bit about politics and technology and growth. So the growth question is all growth. Some people are thinking, well, growth is the kind of root of all evil, and that's why we're in such trouble. Well, it's true that some of the things we're growing are taking us into a lot of trouble, and it's true that those things are tracked with GDP at the moment. But does that mean necessarily that all growth is bad? Well, we'll talk about that in a sec. And then, interestingly, more and more people I talk to sort of people, experts on sustainable food and climate change and all the rest of it, will sort of tell you at the end, well, maybe it all tracks down to values. Maybe there are some values that humans are going to have to adopt, and if we succeed in adopting these values as big cultural norms, then that will enable us to make the changes we need to make. And if we can't do it, then we don't stand a chance. And maybe right at the center of all this is some stuff about how humans think. And maybe we've got all this lovely technology, it's taken us into the Anthropocene, and now to go with it, we really urgently need to become better at some types of thinking. And that's kind of the conclusion of the book. So, to get into some of that, just to start off with some of the green stuff. I'll start with some stuff on food, land and sea, and quite a bit of this comes from research that I've done with colleagues at Lancaster, but not all of it by any means. But one of the things we did was we had a really good look at tracking all the essential nutrients at the global and regional level from the field to the fork to see what happens to them. And the first thing to see is that, so this is the world calories per person per day. And it's up at it's nearly 6,000. So we're growing nearly 6,000 calories per person per day at the global level. Isn't that fantastic? It's about 2.5 times what we need. And in America, it's nearly 20,000 calories per person per day in human edible food. And things are a bit closer to the line in some parts of the world, but still looks like a decent surplus. And you can do this kind of chart for all the essential nutrients, protein, all the ones that are most associated with hidden hunger. So protein, vitamin A, iron, zinc, for example, and you get a similar kind of picture. So let's have a look at what happens to it. So this is it being grown. So the green bit is the nearly 6,000, 5,900 and something calories per person per day of human edible crops. And we also grow this nearly 4,000 calories of grass, pasture and stover that we can't eat, but animals can. So it's plenty. So let's see what happens next. Just following the human edible stuff, we lose a bit in harvest, and it's very hard to eradicate that completely. Some of it's really unnecessary. Some of it's because the supermarket chain decides they can't be bothered with a crop anymore. They've got a surplus, or they don't like the standard of it or something, and it just doesn't get harvested. But a lot of it is just the inefficiency of harvesting. So we can make some improvements there, but we lose a slither. And we lose a slither at the next stage, which is through post-harvest losses just in storage. And mostly that is a developing world problem, and it often just boils down to, you know, a place to store food where it won't go off. And at face value, it looks really, you know, it's inherently really solvable. But we've still got plenty. Look, it's still well over 5,000 calories. I hope you can read stuff from that distance. I'll read out the numbers. It's probably a bit small for you. And then this is a really interesting phase. This is the bit where we divvy it up and work out where this food's going to go. So this yellow slither here is good news. That's the bit that we keep as seeds so we can have food next year as well. So that's a good idea. And this bit here stays in the human food supply. And this blue chunk is non-food uses, and that's almost all biofuel. So it's not necessarily a problem at the moment, but it could be. So if you look at the trade-off, so I drive a little C1 car most of the time, and if you wanted to grow wheat to turn into biofuel to power my car, about enough calories for me to eat for a day is what it would take to produce biofuel to drive that car for 1 mile. Right? So 1 mile against a day's worth of calories for a person. So that's a really steep trade-off. Now there are improvements we can make on biofuel. You can start growing cellulose crops, and maybe you could get maybe even a factor of 5 improvement on that. And maybe further down the line there are some third-generation biofuels, and maybe we can do a lot better still. But it's still a really, really steep trade-off against food against energy if you start going to biofuels. And then the biggest deal is down here. So this is the human edible crops that we feed to animals. So animals eat all of that and all of that. And that's something like 3/4 of the calorific requirement for the whole of humanity getting fed to animals just in crops, human edible crops. So animals eat this chunk, and they give us back this red chunk, and this load here gets lost in things like animals wasting energy by walking around and keeping warm and doing inefficient things like that. But we still get a bit back, and there's still plenty, but we lose a bit through distribution and processing. Actually, supermarkets don't lose much because they're so financially incentivized not to. And then on average, we eat a little bit more than consumers waste a chunk. Not so much in some parts of the world, but quite a bit in this part of the world. And then on average, we eat a little bit more than we need, which is that on average, more of us are overweight than underweight. But overall, there's a sense of surplus there, and you can do this for any nutrition, any of the sort of most critical human nutrients you like. If you do this story for protein, you get exactly the same story. People who say animals create protein, they don't. Animals destroy protein, but they give us some back, and there's an even greater surplus in protein at the global level than there is in calories. And you can do it for the key vitamins as well. And the other thing that I think this tells us some really simple things. So it says, if we were to reduce the extent to which we feed human edible crops to animals, it would really, really take the pressure off the food system. And if we were to eat less meat and dairy and less grass and pasture to animals as well, we don't have to go to zero, but if we could just reduce it, then we could free up land for biodiversity. We could even create a bit more space for some more biofuel. We've got choices about how we could play our cards, but we would create a lot more space in the food system. Cut waste at every stage, of course. And the other thing I think it's really stands out from this is that there is an inherent surplus. So when people go hungry for lack of access to food, it's not because the food isn't there. It's because we're not just actually bothered enough to make sure that all the nutrients get to all the parts of the world where people need to have it. So in a way, you could double the food supply. There would still be people going hungry because it boils down to a kind of inequality thing. If all the money you've got won't buy you the food that you need in order to be properly healthy, or you can only just afford it. If somebody else is 1,000 times richer than you on the other side of the world and they fancy a bit of biofuel for their private jet, then the land is going to be used to produce their biofuel rather than to feed you. So it turns out to be an inequality thing. It's about relative wealth, I think, why some people go hungry. Okay, just to look at, I talked about this, the inefficiency of human nutrition going into animals. So just to look at soybeans. So if you feed soybeans to a cow, you typically get about 1/10 of the nutrition back again. And even gram for gram, a soybean thrashes meat in terms of calories, protein, vitamin A, iron, zinc, almost every essential human nutrient. So I couldn't believe it. And when you think, you feed a kilo of soya to a cow and you just get about 100 grams of beef back. That's it's an incredible inefficiency that you're putting into the food system. And just by the way, that cow is also going to belch up a whole load of methane and do a whole load of stuff for climate change, and so on. So this is from a paper in Science, not ours. But just looking at one estimate, I mean, our work was pretty similar to this too. But this is just the greenhouse gas footprint of 50 grams of protein. So 50 grams of protein is about what a person needs for a day. And so, from a beef herd up at 25 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent for your little bit of protein. Down here, you've got pulses, tofu, ground nuts, peas, coming in at sort of, a 50th or so of the carbon footprint. So a huge improvement. So, and I've said already, 2/3 of the world's antibiotics go to animals. So I'm not saying no meat and dairy, but I'm not suggesting any. I'm not even suggesting any huge abrupt changes. But over the next not that many years, we do need to see a big change in the proportions that meat and dairy have in our lives, and we do need to see them going down a lot. So just quickly on fish. So when's a sea bass not actually a sea bass? When it's a Patagonian toothfish that got renamed for marketing purposes. Really very effectively lives in the deep Antarctic, 300 to 3.5 kilometers down, takes 45 years to grow. So if you catch one, it's 45 years before you can replace it. And 80% of it is caught through unregulated fishing, by which we're talking about including slave ships that never even come into port. They just take on fuel and exchange their cargo, and they're just completely off the system. And if you don't know when you go to the supermarket and buy your sea bass, if you don't know that it hasn't come out of a slave ship picking up this stuff, then there's every chance that it has. So fish isn't bad. At the global level, we could have about 30 grams of it per person per day, and if we fished that carefully, we could probably get away with about that level. That'd be okay. At the moment, we're not doing all our fishing sustainably. And there are some parts of the world where fish is it's a really important, essential source of nutrition. So we should probably, for that reason, have a little bit less of that ourselves. But we can have some fish, but we need to move to less. So just really quickly, some food practicalities. So less meat and dairy, less of Less red meat, especially. The ruminant animals, beef and lamb, are the most carbon intensive, but less of every meat. Less dairy, although it's more efficient to keep the animal alive and take its dairy products than it is to kill it. So dairy not quite in the same position. Eat what we buy sounds too obvious to mention, but it's really important. Treat fish as a treat. And then lastly, I'm just going to say, actually start to tune into our supply chains and get to know them all, which the supermarkets don't tell us about properly, but we need to. So for example, do we know whether some vegetables have been air freighted from Kenya or Peru? Has our asparagus been air freighted all the way from Peru or grown locally in the UK? It's kind of the sort of thing we need to get to know. And then what needs to happen at the global level? Well, the shift from meat again, reduce inequality. I think if you want a world where everybody's fed properly, I think you have to reduce the inequality. Keep biofuels in check. It's not that we can't have any, but we can't let them explode, because if we just let the free market do its thing on the food system, and we have a carbon cap, then biofuels will decimate the food supply. There's a lot of improvement to be had just by rolling out existing efficient crop practices. We need more farmers probably rather than less. We've geared our farming system up to be efficient in terms of not needing so many people working on it, because it costs money to pay people to do the work and so on. But it's kind of crazy because we've got more people than we've ever had in the world, and we're going to have even more of them. So one of the best ways we could employ, one of the best ways that people can spend their time is to actually do a really good job of managing our land, not just for food, but for all the other things that it's important for. And more protected seas and regulated fishing. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. Plastic you all know about, but just a quick stat so you could wrap the world, just the discarded plastic, you could wrap the whole world up. If it was all cling film, you could wrap the world up about 1.5 times over. And we've kind of bumbled into that over, I don't know, it feels almost by accident, really. And we've suddenly noticed that all these beaches and pristine beaches in the middle of nowhere are always going to have little bits of plastic, and when they wet on them, and when they degrade, they're not going to be plastic anymore. They're just going to be in even smaller pieces of plastic, but it's still going to be there if you get the microscope out. It's kind of I don't know, in some ways one of the most depressing thoughts about how I said we influence the world by accident and design, and it feels like that's just accidental. We haven't even really, we didn't clock that it was going to happen until suddenly it's happened, and now we're doing it, of course, faster and faster. So just quick, I'm going to move on to energy and climate change, but I know that you've had Kevin Anderson here quite recently, some of you, and also my second book was about that, but I'm just going to say climate change in one slide, just a few things that everybody needs to know. So here's the carbon curve, right? This is our emissions curve, and there it is now, and it has been going up exactly as if, as far as we can tell, exactly as if humans had never noticed climate change. So just to be really clear, right, there's not one jot of a detectable response at the global level. So all the climate talks and all the government targets and all the stuff that businesses are doing and all the stuff that individuals are doing, at the moment, at the global level, it's not tracking through to anything at all. So why would that be? You'd expect to see at least a bit from some of the good actions that we know take place, right? And it turns out to be this balloon squeezing effect, or the rebound effect, or however you want to describe it. But if you make a change in one place, the rest of the system has got a nasty knack of just absorbing, of just counterbalancing what's gone on. And at the moment, we're just victim to a much bigger dynamic that's happening. And humans have so far demonstrated zero agency over that. Absolutely zero agency. Which doesn't mean to say we can't take agency, but it does mean that we need to look hard at what's going on and why is it going on. Why hasn't efficiency brought us any improvements? Well, it turns out when you look at almost all efficiency improvements, that whenever humans get an efficiency improvement, we don't bag the savings, we just up our consumption even a little bit more than the efficiency improvement. So actually the efficiency improvement becomes part of the dynamics by which we have even greater impact on the world, not less impact on the world. It's a really critical concept to get our heads around. It doesn't mean to say that efficiency improvements can't help us. They can help us, but we need to make sure that we bag the savings, and it doesn't happen by default. So that's the curve as it is at the moment. That's how it needs to be. That's the fuel in the ground, and this here is how much of it we can burn. So we absolutely need a global arrangement to leave the fossil fuel in the ground, almost all of it. And then, actually, I've got an update on this one, which is the next slide, which I'll show you, which is a bit better. This is just about how the science has got more scary. As 10 years I've been working hard on this, the science has got, or more, the science has got considerably more scary on climate change in terms of what sort of temperature has what kind of impact and is how risky. And then maybe this is the most interesting thing about the whole climate change problem, is how come we've all been asleep on it? I mean, maybe that is the crux of it. Just to come back to that red chart. Oh no, oh sorry, I haven't got it. Somehow it's missed off. Right. There's another verse. This is the original analysis that led to 2 degrees of how risky a different temperature change is. It dates back to 2001, and it was based on this analysis that the IPCC said we'd better not let temperatures go above 2 degrees. In 2009, the same people went back to the same analysis but with better data, and you can see the reds come down and 2 degrees is looking really, really risky. And the third one, which is missing, is what came out in the IPCC, in the 1.5 report. And you can track it through in exactly the same way, and you see that the reds come right down even further again. In fact, they've had to invent a whole new color scheme for really, really, really bad risks. And just to make the point, 2 degrees really, really is a temperature that will be difficult to live with. And could bring about all kinds of tipping points and nasty catastrophic tipping points, which we might encounter anyway today, even if we never burned another lump of coal anywhere in the world. But we'd be very likely to get away with it if we were to do that right now. Pretty unlikely, probably, it's looking like, at 2 degrees. So we absolutely, nobody really knows. Nobody can really quantify these risk levels. All these bandings in here are just people, going, clever, thoughtful people, but at the end of the day, just kind of trying to estimate risk. It's almost impossible to quantify. Okay, so and most of our emissions are coming from fossil fuels. So just have a look at our world primary energy use. So this is our energy supply. So. Sorry, this is where it comes from. So this much from oil, this much from gas, this much from coal, fossil fuels. 5% still in the most traditional way of all. We're taking it into our mouths. And then the rest of it is wood, that's declining. But the rest of it all just bits and bobs still. Hydroelectricity at 2%, 2.5%, nuclear energy a little bit, other renewables, still tiny. So you think, well, what on earth are we going to do about that? But there's some good news. Turns out there's some really good news. In fact, Chris Goodall, who's in the front row, you can ask him about this. He wrote a great book about this stuff. But it turns out the solar revolution, there's actually no real reason why we can't replace our energy supply primarily with PV. We're only using about 1/7,000th, harnessing about 1/7,000th of the world's sunlight at the moment. And if we were to, just being a bit simplistic, but if you had a blob of solar panels that big, this is to scale, that would capture our entire energy supply at the moment. Now, clearly there'd be some difficulties with how you transmit it around and how you store it at night time and all the rest of it. But just to give a sense of the scale, that's 0.1% of the land area. So 228 miles by 200 square would do it at the moment. Isn't that fantastic? And there's no bottleneck, really, on those solar panels. They're getting cheaper, there are no raw materials. It's not like batteries where we're talking about rare metals and so on. And there's no reason why we can't do that. Just have a look at who gets the sunlight. This isn't so optimistic from a UK point of view. So The size of each country is the amount of sunlight, and the colour scheme is about the sunlight per person. So, I mean, if you were Australian, any Australians? I mean, so they've got 200 times the sunlight per person that we've got. 200 times. We're the 5th worst country in the world for that. It's a mixture of how many of us there are and how much the sun doesn't shine. So there we are, looking skinny and white up there. Bangladesh looks worse than us. Holland and Belgium look worse than us. Rwanda's worse than us. That's about it, actually. So we have to hobble it together. If we're going to have a renewable energy supply, we need to hobble it together through a mixture of different things, sun and wind and tides and all those other things. Interestingly and really encouragingly, and when I first saw this I thought, oh, that's a nice coincidence, but of course it's not. But the people with the most fossil fuel, so these are the fossil fuel supplies, with this is the coal, and the yellow's the oil, and the blue's the gas. USA, China, Russia. So these are the people with the most fossil fuel supplies, and this is their proportion of the world's sunlight. And it's a pretty encouraging picture. Most of the time, the people with the most fossil fuel have also got the most sunlight, because of course the sun landed on their part of the world to build up the fossil fuel supply millennia ago. You know, that's why it turns out like that. Germany is a bit of an exception, and there's a few other smaller countries, but more or less, the countries with the most, you think would have the most to lose, have the best switchover possibilities. Even Russia, I mean, because it's so vast, its sunlight's not so dense, and there are problems with it, but as PV gets cheaper and cheaper, even that becomes possible. And who has the best wind? Wind's got nothing like the potential of solar for the full energy transition for the world. But I just put this slide up because it does make the UK look a little bit darker and a little bit bigger, and it's just kind of reassuring, possibly. Just quick, I'm just picking out excerpts from the book. I can't possibly go through the whole thing, but just quickly on travel and transport. Sorry. Right, you're slightly guinea pigs, right? The book comes out tomorrow, so I'm still honing this talk slightly. Slides are slightly mixed up. So this is the slide you've just seen. This is how much we'd need for today's energy supply. But what if we keep growing at 2.4% per year, as we've been doing for the last 50 years? In 100 years' time, it'll look like that. In 200 years' time, it'll look like that. And in 300 years' time, you'd need solar panels without any spaces between them over the entire land area of the Earth, plus a bubble down here out in the sea. So there'd be no human on land would be allowed to have any sun landing on their skin, because that would just be too inefficient, right? So the point I'm making here is that we can replace today's energy supply, but if we just use that renewables to have it as well, and to grow our energy supply, then we'll just keep the fossil fuel coming out of the ground, and we'll hit the buffer at some point anyway. It's not too far away, and we'll just see more and more solar panels, and the world will look more and more like a car park, and all the rest of it. So somewhere we have to ask the question, is it possible to say, well, we've got enough energy now? Actually, we can live. More energy is not going to give us more well-being. Can we constrain ourselves to today's energy supply level? Now we really are on travel and transport. So this is just a story of the last few years, estimates of the human travel miles. So air growing uncomfortably, and that's going to be a real crunch in the low carbon world. How are we going to keep any aeroplanes in the sky, or many aeroplanes in the sky? Rail about the same. Walking about the same, and road going up. That's all the miles, all the walking miles, including kind of between the kettle and the sink. Rough estimates. And in the low carbon world, one way or another, just about all our energy for travel is going to come from land. And various choices about how we could do it. We could grow grass and turn that into a second generation biofuel, and use that to drive a car. We could grow wheat and turn that into bread, eat the bread and power a bike. Or we could have a solar panel, get some electricity and drive a car. Or we could have solar panel electricity and put that into an electric bike. So let's see, I've got some pieces of string to see how many miles we'd get, to represent how many miles we'd get from a square metre of land from each of those 4 methods. So there you go, there's the biofuel with a little bit of string, if you can just see it there, 5 miles. And that's a second generation biofuel. It would be 1 mile if you were using wheat. The bike, 25 miles, that's a lot better. Electric car, over 1,000 miles. And then the electric bike, 21,000 miles. Look at that. Actually, I'm a bit sad, really, that the conventional bike gets so badly thrashed by the electric bike. But there's still other good reasons. The conventional bike's still going to survive. But it emphasises the point, biofuels are absolutely not the future. And just quickly, I just thought I'd have this one on diesel. I've got a nasty confession about this diesel van that I've got, which we absolutely try to use the minimum amount. But this is just a few sums we did. Actually, we did this for BT, who were wondering whether they've got their OpenReach fleet is all diesel vans, and should they switch to electric? How many people die as a result of people driving their diesel vans? So this is, if you drive a mile, how many minutes worth of life are you taking from the people around you? If you add up the little bit that you take off the life expectancy of all the people around you, if you added it all up, how many minutes would you get? So it's not that each person loses this amount of time, it's just if you add it up over everybody. So here's an electric car driving on a rural road. 14 seconds. So there are still some emissions because the power station the electricity's probably not just come from all renewables. A petrol car, 1 minute 20, diesel car quite a bit more, but when you get into an urban environment, so this is the diesel car driving in an urban environment. So you drive, this is per mile, you're taking 12 minutes out of the lives of the people around you for every mile that you drive it. So the question of, how urgently should I ditch my diesel? Well, possibly quite urgently. Okay, that's a tour of some of the stuff in the green section, and now I'm going to get into, so what would it take to be solving these problems? Because they are solvable at the technical level. So, what is it okay to keep growing, and when we can't keep growing something, when can we say, are we capable of becoming satiated? I'm going to have to speed up a bit. So this is just, in terms of our energy supply, the fossil fuel that we use is going to be the gap between our renewables and our total energy consumption. So if we can stop growing our total energy supply, it's going to really, really help us. This is just my little chart. I put it in an exponential curve just to be reassuring for people who like being on exponential growth curves, because we're so kind of culturally committed to them. But it's just my little, from very bad to probably essential, different kinds of growth. And there are some down here that clearly, at the worst end, we've got greenhouse gas emissions and meat consumption, and GDP actually, it's probably not necessarily a bad thing. It's pretty dangerous, but it's not. It's only an abstract human concept. I mean, it's not impossible for us to have GDP growth without, in principle, without a sustainable world. But up here we've got things like population. We could probably grow a bit, but not too much. But up here we've got some things that we probably absolutely need to grow, like our capacity for global empathy, so that we really do tune in at the emotional level to people on the other side of the world. We probably need to get much better at that. Mindfulness, compassion, systems thinking, well-being. It's okay for humans to try and grow well-being, so we can still be ambitious about some things. We need to get a lot sharper at working out who we trust. So we might just reflect on, what is our basis for working out who we can trust in all this. I would have put a few other faces on here. Greta Thunberg, probably the Swedish girl. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She probably deserves a picture on a face up here. From the Green New Deal. But we just need to get a lot sharper at being discerning about what is my criteria by which I trust an information source or a politician? And if I don't trust them, am I shifting? Am I putting my money into a different media channel? Am I using a different media channel? Do all my politicians know well in advance of the next election that I really care about truth? And if I don't think I'm getting it, they definitely won't be getting my vote. Just another little snippet on inequality. So why are most Americans so much poorer than most Italians? So this is GDP per person for different countries. There's the States looking really, really rich, and there's Italy looking not so rich, and Spain over here looking a lot less rich. We think of America as a really rich country, but now I'm going to put the median wealth up, so the person in the middle who's got as many people in that country who's richer than them, as poorer than them, and suddenly you see the States right down here, and most people in the States, poorer than most Italians, poorer than most Spanish people. So it's just because the wealth is so concentrated in so few people. And we're sort of like, with many things, we're a bit like the States, but not quite as bad. There's a few things that we're like that. So there we go. So the 10, you hear all sorts of statistics about this. The 10 wealthiest Americans could quadruple the wealth of the poorest half of Africa. And we're not asking them to suffer, they can still be billionaires. But that's pretty extreme, isn't it? And it doesn't even give them it doesn't even enhance their well-being. Okay, how many? And I couldn't resist some stuff on prison stats. Here's just one of them. I just think this is eye-watering. So if you're a male born in Louisiana, the women are in yellow. It's much better to be a woman when you're thinking about prison. But if you're a male born in Louisiana, you can expect to spend nearly 2 years in prison. I mean, that is just, I would hate to spend even a single day in prison. That's what it's like, not much personal space. Why is this here? Is partly, perhaps just to emphasize, the opportunity to live better than we are living now. The transition to a more sustainable world, to an Anthropocene fit way of doing things is not exactly hardship. We've got opportunities to knock out stuff like this. So I think if we're going to get on top of it, at one level you could say, well, perhaps it all tracks down to values. So 3 values that we absolutely, and you could say, well, these are nice to have anyway. Or you could say, well, let's just look at it from a practical point of view. If we're going to solve these big global systemic challenges, do we need to have these values? So all people of inherent equal value, whoever they are, whatever country they come from, whatever race, whatever anything. Do we need to have that as a value that we really cherish and try to live by? And that's pretty challenging because almost everything we do in this country completely ignores that. Second up, respect for the world, including all its life forms. All the other species in the world, not just as servants to humanity, but perhaps because they're of some value in their own right, some inherent value. And then third up, as I've already talked about, respect for truth for its own sake, even when it's inconvenient. So, yeah. Maybe you could say, well, if we just really got those sorted out, maybe that would get us there. Maybe everything else would just fall out of the hat. And then just finally, so the conclusion of the book is on how do humans need to think? Are there ways in which we need to rapidly evolve our thinking if we're going to get on top of this stuff? And so here's my little 8 ways that I think. So I think we need to get better. We need to get better at big picture thinking because we need to be able to hold all this multidisciplinary global stuff in our heads at the moment, because the Anthropocene demands it. We need to get better at global empathy where we actually get an emotional reaction to people on the other side of the world who we're never going to meet, whose lives are totally different to ours. It's kind of a thinking skill we need to have. We need to get better at thinking further into the future. We probably need to get better at appreciating small local things that don't have to have an impact, don't have to have a high impact. We need to be able to get better at getting really excited about stuff that doesn't require us to fly to the other end of the world or something. That have less impact. In terms of the truth stuff, so self-reflection, so we get better at noticing why we're having the reactions we're having, just to understand our own motivations and the things that are driving us, so that we can to help us detect truth better. Critical thinking, so we're better at understanding when we're getting mumbo jumbo and when we're getting the real thing. Complexity and complicatedness, well, we've been getting better at that anyway all the time, and perhaps I've said this already, we need to get better at joining it all up. So, and as things get more complex, the tendency in some ways to hone down on our silos gets stronger and stronger, but actually the need to hold the whole thing in our heads gets stronger. So, and some people say, well, when it's all so global, what can I do about it? Surely, it's a global thing, so what can an individual do? And I've talked about those rebound effects. So I think it's about, learning to do those thinking skills, insist on our politicians having those skills, be especially discerning about the truth and support it and insist on it. Take it everywhere. Take it to your university, take it to the pub, take it to your place of work, take it absolutely everywhere. I sometimes work in businesses where people explain to me that they're real human beings when they're at home, but at work all you're allowed to talk about is money, otherwise you won't get your next promotion or something. It's really important we take our whole selves to work. Be discerning about how we spend money. There's quite a lot about money and economics in the book, but every time you spend or invest money, you are pushing for one future or another. Be a role model as best you can, but whilst enjoying life and not beating yourself up for your shortcomings. And we should spend more time dreaming of the future. We don't spend enough time, we spend a lot of time doom and glooming about where we're heading. We don't spend enough time dreaming about the future. So I don't either, but there's my final slide. So, maybe the world could be a bit like that. Lots of beautiful things and people having a nice time, and even space for a little aeroplane down in the corner, if we're careful. So that's my really imperfect attempt, of course, totally imperfect attempt to try and put together a whole picture of what's going on and what it might take to deal with it and what might we do about it. And I hope it's definitely, of course, it's not the last word, and I hope that you guys can all think of ways in which it could be better. Thank you for listening.